I'm with Yarden Finkel from Honest Reporting. Now, Yarden, what is Honest Reporting?
Well, Honest Reporting is an organization that monitors the media for evidence of bias against Israel. We are really focused on how the Arab-Israeli conflict is reported, and we want to see, are the accurate facts coming out, or are some people putting their own opinions in to the detriment of Israel? So what we try to do is, when we find evidence of bias, we write articles, we send them to 180,000 people, and then they forward them on. We point out where an article is inaccurate, and we ask people to contact the media themselves and ask for an explanation or a retraction.
So when were you established, and why were you established?
We were established about 8 years ago, and the catalyst to starting Honest Reporting was a New York Times article that ran during the Intifada, which showed a picture of a bloodied man with an Israeli policeman wielding a baton behind him, and the caption was that the Israeli policeman was beating a Palestinian on the Temple Mount. Now, the actual fact of this case was there was a Jewish yeshiva student who was attacked by a mob, and he ran, and he saw a Israeli policeman who came out to protect him, and the Israeli policeman was standing over him, keeping that mob at bay with his baton, when a photographer snapped the picture. So in actuality, that picture showed the reverse of what the New York Times captioned. It was an AP picture and caption, but the New York Times published it. And people around the world were outraged. They were outraged at Israel. They said, how can Israel do this? And you see one wrong caption because somebody had not taken the time to really look at the picture, which anybody who knows Israel would instantly see that something was wrong. Would have known that what the caption said was not the actual facts of the case. And so a lot of people were disturbed by this, and the idea was to put together an organization that could respond very quickly when things like this came out to try to get a retraction and to stop the bias.
So is there a lot of inaccuracy in the media?
It depends what you say by the media. There are certainly certain outlets that seem to have an editorial slant against Israel when they report on the news. And those are the ones that we try to highlight. And it seems that the same news organizations again and again come on our radar screen.
So who's the worst of the ones, medias that are actually broadcasting?
Well, we look at many different types of media. I would certainly say that the BBC is one of the worst. And the reason I say this is I myself have written 3 long-term reports analyzing hundreds, if not thousands, of articles from the BBC and trying to look at things like how they write their headlines, who they interview, what sort of stories they select to run. And it's interesting. It's not just we had one report and the BBC responded that we were a pro-Israel organization and so that our accusations were without merit. And yet last week the BBC themselves have said that their Middle East editor, Jeremy Bowen, was guilty of bias in his reporting on the Middle East. So we're not alone. Even the BBC admits that the BBC is biased.
Now, does a journalist put his life in danger when he goes into somewhere like Gaza, and if he was to actually report something that was pro-Israel, would that make it very difficult for a journalist?
Well, I think it obviously would, and that's a major problem. We saw during the Intifada the famous case where 2 Italian journalists took the famous pictures of when the Palestinians lynched 2 Israeli soldiers, and one Palestinian had his bloodied hands out the window. That picture went around the world. And it was 2 Italian journalists who did that story, and then their lives were threatened. And they promised not to report like that again. Certainly, if a journalist goes into Gaza, I think their life would be in jeopardy if they reported the wrong news, according to the Palestinians. And yet, the fact is, journalists have a responsibility for accuracy. I don't accept it as an excuse. Then say, we cannot report the facts here, we don't know what's going on, because our lives are in jeopardy if we report the truth.
Does the media have a big impact on the way we think?
Absolutely. You see things happen that are reported in the media, and from the media it goes to the politicians. And from the politicians it goes around the world, and public opinion is shaped. If you look at the Gaza war, there were numerous examples of articles that came out where the story was wrong, the facts were incorrect, but it didn't matter. Within 24 hours we had calls to condemn Israel from all around the world based on incorrect stories.
Now, we've recently had a war in Gaza. What was reported that was false there, and what wasn't reported that should have been reported?
Well, specifically, we had many stories of atrocities performed by Israeli soldiers that ended up being not true. There were numerous articles that said Israeli soldiers were shooting civilians at point-blank range, that they were asking women and children to come out of houses with their hands up and then murdering them when they came out. And then when investigations went into this, because all of us in Israel would be horrified if such things happened. I mean, the IDF is our sons. They're our sons and our daughters, and they're a part of us in every way, and we pride ourselves that the IDF is the most ethical and moral military force in the world. So we would be shocked at these things. Turns out these accusations were without merit. There was no evidence, no facts found to support these cases whatsoever. And you have to understand, the Israeli army, you have every single unit. You have people who politically are on the right, politically who are on the left. They are religious, they are secular. If somebody committed an atrocity, people wouldn't just be quiet. They would be eager to turn in somebody who did such a thing and tarnish the name of the IDF. So that was one case of stories that were simply not accurate. There was another one, the famous United Nations school that was bombed. We said at Honest Reporting, look out for the massacre that's going to come, because the Hamas is losing the war. And if you look at history, what happens then is they'll accuse Israel of some atrocity. The next day, we had reports that Israel had bombed a UN school. And that went all around the world. Once again, Israel was condemned. What had happened? Well, there were Palestinians outside the school where refugees were sheltering, and they were firing mortars at incoming Israeli troops, and Israel returned fire. Israel did not kill 42 civilians. Israel killed 12 people, 9 of whom were affiliated with Hamas, and it was all outside the school. Israel did not bomb the school. And even the United Nations admitted 2 days later that that was in case the point. But the damage had been done. Who reads retractions? They're buried in the back of the paper. They're not the stories at the top of the internet websites. So the damage is already done. You asked what stories were not reported. The fact is, the media could not emphasize enough what it's like for people who live in Sderot and other Israeli towns to be subject to missile attack for year after year after year. Every day. Have you been to Sderot? You should go to Sderot, and it's amazing. Here is a modern city. Every block, there's several bomb shelters. And for many years, several times a day, whoever you were, children, older people, the air raid sirens go off, and you have to run for these shelters. That's your life. Kids can't play outside. We talked to, last time we were there, we talked to one elderly person who said, the siren goes off 5-6 times a day. I'm too old. I can't run to a shelter, so I just sit here. I don't run. I can't get to a shelter. No country in the world would let its civilians be attacked day after day after day without responding. And that's really the story. And that should have been covered more.
Now, when Israel went to the war in Lebanon, you just talked about the Palestinians' crime massacre. There seemed to be a big turning point in the war when Israel hit a house and many, many people were killed there. Was that actually reported true, or was it reported as false?
There were elements of truth, and there was truth missing from it. Yes, a house was destroyed. There were a lot of civilians killed. War is painful. Civilians die in war. But the main story was, at the time, Hezbollah was firing rockets and missiles from civilian areas. If you fire a gun, a missile, a rocket, a mortar from a house at me, I have no choice. I don't want my people to die. I will attack you wherever you are. Now, the story that some reported and others didn't is before attacking, the IDF would drop leaflets. It would make phone calls. There was a computer making automated phone calls to people saying, this area has been used by Hezbollah to attack Israel. It is subject to attack. You must leave immediately. And that's what army in the world would do it. Did the United States do that in Afghanistan? Did the United States make phone calls to Afghans saying we're about to attack this town? I don't think so.
Now, I watched on your website a video from the Gaza Strip where Hamas were using human shields. Is that something they practice in the Gaza Strip?
Absolutely. And the evidence, it's not even a debate. They don't call it human shields. They say that they're martyr volunteers, but to protect the terrorists, they surround themselves with women and children. And once again, when you store rockets in a mosque, we're going to have to destroy that mosque. Sorry, we're not going to buy it that there are civilians there and we can't attack. One case where we didn't attack, it's well known that Shifa Hospital in Gaza City was used as a headquarters for Hamas. There are bunkers underneath the hospital, and that's where the leaders of Hamas would meet. And Israel refrained from attacking it. We just couldn't attack a hospital, even though it was a legitimate target at that point.
So when Israel hit a school or they hit a mosque, we should really think behind the story of why they're actually hitting the school or the mosque.
Certainly, every journalist should ask, why is a place of worship, why is a school being hit? Certainly they shouldn't just turn a blind eye to it, but if it's a legitimate military target, we should all be outraged that schools and mosques and other civilian areas are being hit. It is an outrage. It's a terrible thing. The question is, who is responsible? And I say Hamas is responsible.
So we've heard how the world media are playing. How does the Palestinian media fare in all of this?
Well, if you've ever talked to one of the more prominent Palestinian journalists who writes for the Jerusalem Post now, Khalid, I'm trying to remember his name, he started working for Palestinian media. And he said he quit and he went to work for the Jerusalem Post. And his friends say, how can you do that? How can you work for the Israelis? He said, because working as a journalist, as a Palestinian journalist, you are told what stories to write and how to write them. He says, in Israel, I can write whatever I want. They don't say, here, go cover this story and here's what you write. So the Palestinian media is basically speaking for the Palestinian leadership. But that's not something our organization covers. That is more left for people like Edom or Marcus. Our focus is really on the Western media and how they're reporting the conflict.
Do the Palestinian media target children in the conflict? For instance, I've seen a video of Mickey Mouse. Yeah.
Yes, certainly. I think we've all seen that, and we all laugh, even though it's a terrible subject, because there's been Mickey Mouse, there's been a bee, there's been a bunny, there's all these lovable childhood characters who teach Palestinian children that it's a wonderful thing to kill Jews. And the Palestinian children, that is one of the hardest things about the peace process. How can you have a peace when you have a whole generation of children that are being educated to hate and to kill Israelis? My children, I have 4 children. They go to schools, Israeli schools here, and you got to believe me, they are not taught to hate Palestinians. It's very difficult sometimes. My son had a friend who was killed by a terrorist with an axe just a week or 2 ago. And how do you explain to a child of 13 years old, you cannot hate all Palestinians because of this? It's very difficult. But that is a goal of every parent out here. And it's not a goal of the Palestinians, I'm afraid.
Now on your website you have a Dishonest Reporters Award. Who's winning these awards and what inaccuracy are they portraying?
We had Christian Amanpour a year ago. The BBC has been featured regularly. The Guardian. What we find is actually the European media tends to be much more biased against Israel than the American media. Even though most of our subscribers are in America, the stories that are the most outlandish appear in the UK press and other European press. So they are always running ahead when it comes to dishonest reporting. With the Gaza war, we're going to see the Gaza war happened in between one year and the next, so we kind of delayed Dishonest Reporter Award for the Gaza war, and we'll see what happens. Who is going to be the worst on that?
What sort of things are they saying in the dishonest reporting?
Well, it's the kind of things I'm telling you. When they have an article that says, the BBC has an article about Israelis mowing down, shooting with machine guns Palestinian children, and then says in the article, we cannot confirm the facts of this story. They say that in the article as if then they have no responsibility. You can't print that. If I were to accuse you of murder with no evidence, could I call CNN and say, yes, I was just interviewed by this journalist and I saw him killing people? Would they instantly report on that without doing the investigation, without doing the fact-checking? I really doubt that. One thing that came to mind just a week ago after this terrible attack in Bat Ayin, which is just a few kilometers from here, this was a couple days ago in Beit Haggai, another Israeli yeshuv, another Israeli settlement. And what happened is a Palestinian with a knife came into the settlement, and he attacked 2 people, and they killed him. The 2 people he attacked, they were on security patrol. One of them had a gun, and one of them shot him, and they killed him. The AP's headline for that article was Palestinian dies in West Bank violence. I mean, that is not Palestinian dies in West Bank violence. That is terrorist attacking Jewish settlements killed. And, those kind of things are the most dishonest of all. A lot of times it's not the reporters, it's the editors who make the headlines and make the captions for photographs that are guilty of the dishonest reporting.
Now, in the Gaza Strip, it looked like there was quite a humanitarian crisis. Was Israel holding back aid from the Palestinians, or were they actually helping the Palestinians?
Israel, time and time again, was trying to help the Palestinians, and it was Hamas who was locking up that humanitarian aid. It was Hamas who was cutting off the electricity. We had, in one case, before the war started, when we were just being hit by rockets day after day, Israel decided to slightly reduce the amount of diesel fuel going to Gaza, which represented less than a quarter of the electrical needs of Gaza. And yet at 8 p.m. on Al Jazeera, there were pictures of Gaza City, and all of a sudden all the lights went out at once. The lights went out at once, and people poured into the streets holding candles. Very nice for the world media. The fact is, Hamas turned off the power. It was a photo op. I mean, they tried to play this up in the media all they could. There's the famous picture of Hamas had a meeting, the Palestinian legislature had a meeting, and they're sitting in a room and there's a candle on each desk because, of course, the Israelis shut off the power. Well, the fact is this was a photo op. You can clearly see in this picture, this meeting took place in the afternoon, this bright sunlight behind the windows, and they put up these dark curtains on the windows to make the room appear darker so the candles would appear brighter. That's a photo op. That is somebody manipulating the media, and the media should be smarter than that.
So why is the media so anti-Israel?
There's many answers to that question, and the first is the nature of news today. The nature of news is not news, what happened earlier today, what happened an hour ago. It's now news. Something happens, and I'm guilty. We're all guilty of this. If a friend called me and said, "Oh, you got to go to CNN.com, you got to go to BBC.com. Guess what just happened?" I want to know instantly what's happened. No, you can't. There's an explosion somewhere. Something happens. It takes a little while for the facts to be known. And still, everyone says, we demand news right now. If you go to a website that doesn't have an updated story about a breaking news event, you're going to go on to another news story. So an editor says to his reporters, get me something right away. Get me something an hour ago. Get me something now. So if you have that, and you have people out there, professionals, very sophisticated people out there whose job it is to manipulate the media, the reporter says, what happened? Anybody know what happened here? And some guy walks over and says, I'll tell you exactly what happened. An Israeli soldier threw a grenade at children. That's what gets reported first. Then later on, when the facts become known, maybe the articles are revised, but the damage has been done. People care about what's happening right now, and 10 minutes later, they're on to the next story. So part of it has nothing to do with people hating Israel. Part of it is simply the nature of the news. The second part of it is sometimes there are, I'm afraid, journalists, editors, reporters who do have a bias against Israel, who don't like Israel. Don't like the idea that this Jewish state has emerged from nothing over here, and we have built an amazing state. You walk through Tel Aviv, you walk through Jerusalem, and you realize what was here 100 years ago. And it's just amazing, the accomplishment. You look at a lot of the Palestinian towns and villages, and they are not up to the same level. Their economy is not at the same level. And that is a real shame. And I hope the Palestinian economy can improve, but that can only be done if something's done about the terror. The reason we have all these closures and all these restrictions on Palestinians is I don't want my children attacked by a guy with an axe. I want that roadblock there so that a Palestinian's car is searched, so that if 1 in 100 Palestinians has a bomb or a gun in that car, it's found. And I feel bad for the 99 Palestinians who have no interest in terrorism whatsoever, who get delayed at that checkpoint. But I'm sorry, my kid's life is worth more for everyone to have a little bit of a delay.
Now, you have a website. What's your website address, and can people sign up to the alerts that you send out?
Absolutely. The web address is www.honestreporting.com. If you go to the website, there's a box in the upper right-hand corner. You just put your email address in. You'll start getting our material. We publish at least 1 or 2 times a week. If there's something big going on, like during the Gaza war, we'll publish almost every day. We have short articles, longer analysis. We do short videos. We try to provide a lot of different media. And the whole goal is to educate people and to empower them to respond to the media. Because if I write to the BBC, I'm a professional who is, I wouldn't call myself an activist, but they can say, oh, that's just honest reporting. But if a BBC subscriber writes in, if 10,000 BBC subscribers write in, that has more of an impact.
Okay, Yarden, thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be on.